Hall and Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of our Doing Business in Australia podcast. My name's Mark Dunphy, and I'm a partner at Hall and Wilcox. Today we're going to shine a spotlight on the US, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague and fellow partner, Jackie Barrett, who's the head of our US practice. Welcome, Jackie. I want to start, Jackie, with maybe just some general observations. What do we need to tell people doing business in Australia, particularly people from the States?
I think the primary thing that I would tell a US company coming to the Australian market is that it's a well-trodden path, as it were. And by that, I mean, there's been a lot of investment coming from the US over many years. And so in terms of structures and systems that are in place that are attractive to US companies coming into the Australian market, they are there already. In terms of investment, the US is by far the largest investor into the Australian market. And in turn, I would note the United States is a top target for investment and new business from the Australian market. And so there's a lot of reciprocity and a lot of friendliness. An American business will find Australia to be very receptive to investment and new business growth with few barriers to entry. This is because the two countries are similar culturally, and Australia has a friendly corporate tax system. We're also close geographically. We're a democratic country with a stable economy. And so, we're an attractive market. I think often a lot of our US clients coming into Australia are using us as a little bit of a test market as well, because there's so many similarities, but we are a good base, particularly coming into the Southeast Asian region, to test the market, to try new products, to test out your systems, and then perhaps go more broadly into Southeast Asia. So it can be a bit of a bouncing off point. We also have a very talented and highly skilled workforce, which is attractive, highly innovative, very attractive for US companies looking for new technologies and looking for opportunities to grow their businesses in different ways.
I guess Australian businesses are probably very attractive to US businesses given the relative lack of parity with our dollars at the moment, our currency.
That's right. That is very true. When I go to visit the US, I'm always saying, come to Australia because, our dollar is very attractive to the US market at the moment. So we would be more affordable, shall we say, Mark, to a US company looking for new targets. Yeah.
And has that led in and of itself, do you think that leads American businesses to want to invest in Australia?
It depends on what they're looking for. A lot of our clients are seeking to acquire new businesses, and so they might be complementary, so the same sort of business, so it's a growth strategy that they're pursuing, or they might be a bolt-on acquisition, so they might be slightly different, but it fills a gap in their service offering. And actually some examples of recently where American companies are buying Australian businesses, particularly in the technology space, because they are doing a new technology that is complementary to the service and product that they're offering globally. And now they have a base in Australia where that work can be done and then in turn brought back out into the US and other countries. And so I think certainly there is, of course, it's attractive from a pricing perspective, but I think Australia has a really good and strong reputation for innovation and technology, and that's very attractive to American companies.
Thank you. Are the business structures that we tend to use in Australia largely comparable to ones that US businesses would be accustomed to? And so is there a degree of familiarity which makes things attractive?
Yes, I think in particular, the company structure would be familiar to American clients, be more likely that they would be looking at a private company. And so in our language, we would be saying a proprietary limited company would be very familiar, but for an American company, that would be an LLC. And so the same structures apply. You would have a shareholder pool, their liability is limited, same structures with directors, and you can have different classes of shares. And you are governed by what's called a constitution in Australia.
And you mentioned their directorships. Would a US entity opening a subsidiary in Australia or creating a subsidiary in Australia, do they need to have an Australian resident director, or can the directors be Americans?
No, so if a US company was setting up a proprietary limited company here, and that's a private company, you would need at least one resident director. And so they would need to find a suitable candidate who is able to perform that role. We have clients who will sometimes send a person out, and so they have to think about the appropriate visas that they might need and various permissions. But it's more common actually to have a person who's already based in Australia perform that role, particularly in the early days. And so we have clients who might use an accounting firm or another group who their business is to provide that director role for companies coming into the Australian market.
Hmm. And you mentioned, Jackie, their visas. Is it if an American entity wanted to create something in Australia and send their people here, is it difficult for them to bring their employees out here? So is it difficult to get appropriate visas?
I wouldn't have said it's terribly difficult, but it is certainly a process that you would need to prioritise if you were planning to, if you had a particular timetable for launching your new business in an Australian market, because everything does take time and you would need to apply for visas.
I'm interested, Jackie, in the types of sectors where US entities are investing in Australia. Are the themes that you're seeing, and have they changed over time?
I would say they've definitely changed over time. 10 years ago, there was a very strong interest in mining and large industry projects, and that's to some extent stayed the same. But now we have a huge focus on investment in renewable energy businesses of all sorts, a lot in solar. I think with the success of some of our unicorn businesses that have gone global from the Australian market, such as Atlassian or Canva, we have a lot of American clients in the technology space who look to the Australian market because they really see it as a breeding ground for innovation and new ideas and new technology. And so they're kind of looking for that next unicorn and that great opportunity coming out of the Australian market. We've seen that a lot recently where private equity and venture capital are looking to the Australian market. Another area of growth, at least that I've observed, is private equity in particular looking to invest in financial services businesses in the Australian market. And that's interesting because I can understand the interest, absolutely, whether it's, insurance focused type business or some other financial service. But because that sector is so highly regulated in Australia through ASIC and through APRA and the various governing bodies, that is an investment area that is very successful, but it does take more time for American clients when they do those types of acquisitions because they have to get their heads around all of the, I suppose, regulation and complexity of operating those types of businesses here in Australia. But other areas we've seen growth in, as I said, renewables, anything in health tech, biotech, very, very strong focus, and also in defence and aerospace. And that is partly due to the AUKUS agreement that was entered into between Australia, the US and the UK. That is creating a lot more opportunities and a lot more interest from the US market about different investments. So they might be coming to Australia to provide services or looking to provide services to the defence industry, or they might be wanting to work directly with government and generate more and more opportunities in that space. And so we have found a lot of clients from the US looking to our market to understand what they need to do or what they can do to get more involved in that defence and aerospace space since AUKUS and since obviously it's a very friendly relationship that has evolved from that agreement coming about.
And there'll be literally billions of dollars worth of trade
Yes.
ultimately, Jackie, I anticipate flowing as a
Yes.
result of AUKUS.
Yes.
Is maybe that's a nice segue into the Foreign Investment Review Board and whether
Yes.
the FIRB will be looking at AUKUS related investments any differently to the way that they traditionally look at investments.
Yeah, I suppose just to give everyone a short understanding of FIRB, so that's the Foreign Investment Review Board, it will look to have some approval role in transactions that either exceed a particular value or relate to sensitive industries here in Australia. I'm speaking very broadly there, and so there is a lot more complexity, but that's kind of the threshold. So because of the defence focus, Mark, I would say that if you are looking to acquire a business that is engaged in defence type services, then, and you're an American company, you would immediately attract the attention of FIRB. And that is because it's a sensitive industry. Obviously, there's so much confidential information. The government would be very keen to understand who the buyer is and also understand who the owners of the buyer are, because depending on the ownership structure, there will be restrictions around an American company coming into the Australian market to buy a business that is engaged in services to defence or in some other way operating in the defence sector. If their ownership is, so for example, if they have foreign government ownership as part of their shareholding, so that would be an area of interest for the Foreign Investment Review Board, if that makes sense. But there are a number of other factors that would be taken into account. But I think if you were looking as an American company coming into Australia to invest or acquire in the defence or aerospace sector, to assume that you would need to apply to the Foreign Investment Review Board for approval for your transaction. And as part of that process, you would need to establish your ownership structure, obviously explain the transaction to the Foreign Investment Review Board, and then they may well then engage with you with a whole variety of other questions. And I would then, of course, from the American company's perspective, be adding 3 months to the timetable for the transaction, just so that there is enough time to get the appropriate approvals.
Jackie, as an employment lawyer, I deal with many American clients who have got businesses here, and Americans typically are very frustrated by our employment laws and our industrial relations system. Americans largely have employment at will. They don't understand unfair dismissal rules. They don't understand the award system, and it's very foreign to them. We can get them through it, and it's becomes second nature to them eventually, with a bit of persistence on our part. I wonder what other areas of law, though, are very different for American entities coming into Australia, and different from a perspective of what they're used to at home.
Yeah, well, workplaces, I also have the same discussions with American clients about workplace laws. I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that, Mark. More often, having to explain to them what long service leave is, that usually is one of the more entertaining parts of that conversation, because it is quite different in the US market. But other areas of law that I think would an American client would not be that familiar with is our unfair contracts regime here in Australia. And so if you're looking to launch products and services in the Australian market and you have, for example, a standard contract, you would be prudent to have that checked for compliance with Australian law, even if you intend for those terms and conditions to still be governed by the laws local to the state in the US that you operate out of. That is because the unfair contracts regime has the ability to apply to US or other foreign companies that are operating in the Australian market if they are dealing with consumers. And so there was quite a big change to the unfair contracts regime in the last couple of years, which has made the penalties associated with breach much higher. And so there's a big focus, particularly from Australian businesses, on compliance. And so that is an area that, if I were a US company, I would look to get on top of before I started operating here. Other areas, as I mentioned before, the financial services regulation generally is quite a complex area. And so if you're looking to come in and to do mortgage broking, insurance broking of any sort, they're just examples. But other financial services, you should assume that you will then have to be complying with the whole spectrum of financial services laws and regulations. I'm going to mention privacy, but I would say for US clients, they would be very familiar with complying with a strict privacy regime, but the laws are different, and so they do need to be checked when they come into the Australian market. And the other area that I think people forget about is property law, because property law is so jurisdiction specific. And in Australia, it's state specific. And so that's the other complexity of the Australian market, is that we have state and federal laws, which of course US companies would be familiar with. But in Australia, for example, stamp duty law is state specific, property law is state specific. In your space, Mark, you've got state and federal that plays into the workplace side of things. So there are quite a few different legal regimes in Australia that you'd need to be familiar with. And I'll also mention, as this is a new thing, the Foreign Investment Review Board also has approval powers in respect of leases for some companies coming into the Australian market. And so that adds another layer of complexity as well.
Mm. And Jackie, I understand you're off to the IBA meeting in Mexico City in September.
Yep.
Lucky you. And there will be literally thousands of US lawyers at that meeting. What will you be looking to talk to those lawyers about, and what do you think will be of interest to them about what's going on in Australia?
You are right. I think I'm very excited to be attending. Should be a very, very busy couple of days. We look to be speaking to US firms about, I suppose, the new developments in the Australian market. And I think, again, mentioned before, but, the impact of AUKUS, the opportunities in technology, where you might be looking, which states, and any developments in tax law. From the US firms' perspective, what I would love to learn about is, what are their clients doing? What are they looking at in terms of looking into the Australian market? Where do they see the growth opportunities in the next couple of years? I would observe that things seem to have picked up. There's more, it is certainly a lot more inquiries, a lot more things happening, a lot more interest from the US market in all sorts of sectors, but agriculture, energy, renewables, defence, those sorts of spaces. But I'd love to learn more from those US firms as to what they think their clients will be doing in the next couple of years.
Great. Well, I'm very envious of your trip to Mexico, and I look forward to hearing how it goes.
Definitely be reporting back.
Any last observations, Jackie? Big picture issues that anyone looking from the US looking to do business in Australia should be thinking about?
No, but I would just, I suppose, really encourage American firms to feel very comfortable coming into the Australian market. In addition to AUKUS, we obviously have free trade agreements in place. I think, for an American company, there are lots of opportunities at the moment. And so I also encourage them to reach out to the American Chamber of Commerce here. There's a lot of support that they provide as well for American companies looking to come into the Australian market. And so really, that you'll have a very soft landing coming in, and you'll find us a very friendly and cooperative bunch generally.
Just as indeed you are, Jackie. Well, look, we might leave it at that then, Jackie. Thank you very much for those insights. And of course, if anyone else is lucky enough to be going to IBA in Mexico City, would invite you to get in touch with Jackie through our website to make a time to meet with her and our team of other lawyers from Hall & Wilcox who are going to be there. Thank you to everybody who's listened to today's episode. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us. You'll find our details on our website, or you can connect with us via LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review and follow our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.